Well, hey, Ethan.
Are you recording? It doesn't say recording.
It is recording.
Hey,
Thank you.
what's up? I just care about you, and I just want to keep you in check.
Mine says recording. Is yours not saying recording?
It says nothing.
You have internet problems.
Oh, it does say recording. That's not bad.
Well,
I can't read.
Good job on the message this week. It was a little more of an obscure passage in some ways. Like, I don't know that a lot of people are familiar with that.
Yeah.
Passage about Abigail and basically about forgiveness.
Yeah.
Oh, I just hit my hand on my table really.
We're so professional.
We really are. About forgiveness and different ways that we can approach being hurt or how we respond. And you did a really good job of leading us through these different ways that they responded and then what it looks like for us to forgive. I mean, we hear about forgiveness all the time. If you talk to anybody on the street about what does it mean to be a Christian, even if they're not, they're going to maybe say something about, well, I should be a forgiving person, or I should, but should and what we do are usually two different things. I'm wondering if you have any recent or maybe not so recent examples of forgiveness where either you had to ask for forgiveness or somebody had to ask you or somebody had to ask for your forgiveness. Because I was thinking about one for me.
Well, I'll say this before you go. I am a moron. And
yes.
Yeah, this is a known fact. And I feel like I have to ask for forgiveness a lot. I mean, just in my marriage, I do a lot of dumb stuff and say a lot of dumb things. And so I feel like my wife, Emily, is always forgiving me. And, I think there's some humility that comes with that. And there's some grace that comes with that. And, it looks different for every relationship, every friendship. I think.
How does that happen? Like in your marriage, all right.
Yeah.
What does that look like? Like,
well, usually it looks like
specific example. What?
Okay. It usually looks like her saying, "You're wrong," and I say, "No, you're wrong," and then I'm like, "Wait, I'm wrong."
Has she ever said that she's wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. She has. I mean, like 1% of the time. And it's not because she won't apologize. It's because I'm always wrong.
That's probably true.
That is the actual truth.
So is it like you really talk it out, or do you fight it out, or do you kind of go,
it's one of those things where it kind of happens, and I don't know if it's a God thing or if it's just I'm a slow learner, or like I have to learn the hard way. But it's one of those things where I'll walk away from a conversation or even a fight we have, and then as I'm thinking about it, I start kind of pointing the finger back at myself and realizing, oh, you know what, I did this or that, or maybe she did something to me, but she did that as a response to what I had done. You know what I'm saying? So kind of like what I was talking about with my kids, being Sherlock Holmes, trying to figure out where this is coming from, the cause of this. A lot of that, comes from kind of happens as we start to look at, all right, where did this start? Nabal or David was going to start this war, so this fight, and it really was because of the response that Nabal gave him, right? And so, I think a lot of it can be, where is this coming from? Really, is the question that we can ask ourselves.
Well, and we've probably both experienced both sides of that, right? Like, what happens when you don't forgive and you stoke the fire? I mean, you end up like just stoking the fire of resentment, of anger, of frustration, of like, it could be even the small stuff, but it's like low level. Like if you don't deal with it, it becomes this low level noise in your relationship. And then it always comes back.
Yeah. So what sticks out in your mind when you're thinking about forgiveness? And where have you experienced that in your life? I mean, obviously you've forgiven people have forgiven you, but is there
I've never forgiven anyone. I haven't.
Is there one instance that sticks out in your mind?
Well, I was thinking about this, actually a work kind of situation, and it was
with Phil?
It was with Phil. It was actually with you. Here on this video, I'm going to confront you. No, it was a previous employer And actually, let me say this. You and I both worked at the same church. It's not that church I'm talking about. But it's actually before that. So long story short, we had, I worked on staff and just had a great boss in a lot of ways, but there was a lot of tension at that particular time in this place. And there were some things that were said and some things that were done that were really difficult for me, but also for a lot of people that were on that staff team. And I eventually ended up leaving for a bunch of reasons, but partly because just a lot of doors got shut there. And I just felt like I was saying it's time to move on. And really, I think for a couple of years, I mean, holding just being hurt, and really holding I don't think it was a grudge, but I think it was more just disappointment and pain and trying to get through some of the things that had happened to me. And so fast forwarding a couple of years after that, it took a couple of years, this person sought me out and said, "Hey, I'd like to have coffee." And we sat down and he said, "I need to ask for forgiveness." And it was an incredibly powerful thing. And I was at a point where I'd already forgiven him.
Yeah.
I'd already forgiven. I didn't need for him to do that. But the fact that he did was really huge. And I felt like even another wall that I didn't even know was there maybe fell at that point. And it was just, it brought a lot of peace, I would say. It brought a lot of peace in our relationship.
Yeah, and that's what I'm talking about. I wonder if he went through a process of what started this tension between Jerel and I, and maybe he looked in the mirror and thought maybe it was me. And the bad part about a sermon is it's only a certain amount of time, and we can't say everything. And so the reality is, sometimes that doesn't happen, Jerel. Sometimes people are hurt by other people, and those hurts are never acknowledged, and there's never an apology given, and people are left with this weight that I talk about in the sermon, this weight that they have to carry through the rest of their lives. And so that's when we have to learn to release them from their debt, even if they don't deserve it. They're not, they don't even acknowledge that there's a debt to be paid, maybe. Or maybe they passed away. Maybe it's a parent or a grandparent or whatever that passed away, and you're left with this baggage.
Yeah.
And so it's not always as clean or as easy.
And I made that sound really, when I say it in that short of a time period, it sounds really neat, but it wasn't that clean. And I had gotten to a point where I said, I need to forgive this person, even though I felt like they did some things and said some things that were wrong. And I felt at the time like he didn't even know. And I think that's the way a lot of the times it is with us when we need to forgive, is sometimes, not all the time, sometimes it's like we're holding on to something that the other person doesn't even know what they did.
Absolutely.
They don't know that they hurt you. And so it's where really being able to let something go is helpful to me. It's not about, at that point, it's not even about my relationship with them or anything else other than I'm unhealthy right now because I can't let it go. And I've got to get to a point where I'm able to forgive I think you did a good job of making it not sound like Sunday school answer type stuff. We kind of go, just forgive and forget, right?
Oh, sure. That's one of the biggest lies that I think anyone, especially Christians, believe is forgive and forget are hand in hand. The reality is, and that's a perfect example. You've forgiven this employer, but the reality is, if he offered you a job, you wouldn't say yes to that, right?
Right. No.
Even moving forward, you've forgiven him. You would have coffee with him, but you're not going to work with him again. And your friendship moving forward will never look the same. There's going to be different boundaries. Yeah. And I think that's where people kind of get stuck is, well, if I forgive them, then everything's fine and we got to move back. No. If I give you $20, Jerel, and you don't pay me back, I can release you from that debt. But the next time you come around asking for $20, you ain't getting it from me, And so I think moving forward after forgiveness, you don't have to forget. That's silly.
That's right.
Even in abusive relationships, you can't just forget, right? You can't forget that hurt moving forward. And boundaries to be there as well.
drawing appropriate boundaries has nothing to do with forgiveness.
Absolutely.
And, and it's not an awful thing to do to somebody. Sometimes we think, well, I got to forgive them, which means I got to let myself all the way back into that relationship up to this close because we were this close.
Yes.
No, it might very well mean, and what we're talking about now are more harmful relationships, more abusive relationships. It might be that you need to distance yourself with some boundaries.
Yeah,
absolutely. No, just to circle back to circle back to the healthier relationships in our lives for a minute, like your marriage, which you work on, you try to make it healthy, your relationship with your kids, your relationship with your friends, and people you work with, what does it do? Like when you practice forgiveness over and over and over again, what does that do in your relationship? Like what is that? How does that change the level of your relationship, or sort of how does it make it different than if you were just resisting all the time? Did you hear me at all?
Yeah.
Did you hear me at all? Are you back now? Yes. Can you answer the question?
I heard.
Okay. Okay, people. I gotta ask it again. I'll ask it in a shorter way. Can you hear me?
I can.
How does forgiveness, I would say a lifestyle of forgiveness in a relationship, like a marriage or like with your kids or like with your friends, make that relationship better? How does it, what does it do in the relationship to help you have a great and healthy relationship together?
Yeah, well, the message I talk about, forgiveness bringing new life into a relationship. And I think, and I also use the word a new era or a second chance. I think, I think about some of the best times with my kids and some of the times where we've had some of the greatest conversations. My kids are 3 and 5, my boys are. And with my 5-year-old, some of the best conversations we've had are directly after a fight or he got in trouble, right? And so after this conversation happens of forgiveness, and it's almost like this new life is a new rung to a ladder of the relationship. The same thing with my wife. Moving back from Utah, we had one of the hardest, it was year 6 of our marriage, and it was the hardest year of our marriage, just due to the fact of we had to get on the same page with moving and with all the stress that came with that. But it was my favorite year of marriage. And so I think when you fight, when you have conversations, confrontations, whatever, and you say, you know what, we're going to move forward together. I'm going to forgive you. You're going to forgive me. You humble yourselves. You offer this grace. You're reminded why you love each other. It's a new level of that relationship, and that goes for friendships as well. Some of the best friends I have, we fought, and after that fight, it's a different relationship, right? It's a newer, almost a better relationship that you have moving forward.
Yeah, and I would say, and just to close here, I would say that start to see conflict. We got to start to see it as an opportunity, as kind of a fork in the road opportunity. Like it's either going to lead to division or it's going to lead to depth. And I think it's completely in how you handle it and how you deal with being honest and saying you hurt me. And forgiveness also has nothing to do with being pushing something under the rug, right? It's about being honest and saying you hurt me, but I'm ready to forgive you. And if you choose the path of, we've all probably in relationships chosen the path of division, where we just fight. Yeah. And I'm going to build my wall, you're going to build yours, and it's awful, and a lot of marriages fail because of that reason, and relationships, But if we're able to choose, okay, this is an opportunity for some growth and depth. I think what you just said is exactly like you bust through a layer of something, and you get to a point of where it's even better, where the relationship is even better.
And like I said, that takes humility, but it also takes really good conversation, really good communication between a friend or a kid or a spouse. You have to be willing to sit down and talk about this. You can't just roll your eyes and walk away or walk to the other room. You have to kind of hit that conflict head on to kind of, like you said, bust through that wall. Absolutely.
Well, and there's so much more we could talk about with this, but we got to leave it there. Yeah.
I always like plugging books. Look at all I read. I'm so smart. This book here, it's not necessarily about forgiveness, but it's about anger, guilt, greed, and jealousy. And with the anger, it talks a lot about releasing them from a debt maybe they can't pay. And so I'm an emotional person. I'll be honest. I'm a very emotional person. I wear my emotions on my sleeves. That's probably why my wife and I fight, and I'm always having to come back and say, actually, I was wrong. This is one of the best books I've ever read, talking about emotions and conflict and releasing people from a debt.
Yep. Andy Stanley, Enemies of the Heart. Good stuff. One of our faves. All right, man. Appreciate it.
Love you guys.
Good conversation. Talk to you later.